Trebje se demonstrira.
Agresija je završena.
Nemojte da mislite da nećete odvesti Bosnu i Hercegovinu.
Neće više niko možda ostaviti.
Republika Hrvatska proglašuje samostalnom i suverenom državom.
Türkiye'den daha büyüktür. Ufkumuzu 782 bin kilometre kareyle sınırlandıramayız.
Hello, dear listeners. This is Balkan Chronicles, welcoming you to our latest English podcast series. My name is Jakub Horvat, and with me is Filip Ilanković from the Hungarian Institute of International Affairs. Filip, it's lovely to have you today again.
Thank you, Jakub, for inviting me again, and it's a great pleasure to talk with you today again about some interesting topics in the Western Balkans.
Yes, and it's not just Western Balkans today. We are recording in Hungary. You are an expert on Balkan affairs, but yes, coming from a Hungarian Institute of International Affairs. And I think it's a brilliant opportunity to touch on two subjects. Well, I think most of our listeners, all of our listeners, they know that there was a major election recently in Hungary. As we are recording it, a new government will be formed. It's not there yet, but we cannot make any predictions as to what we're discussing, and it will be, I finally got to it, it will be Hungarian foreign policy in the Western Balkans and its immediate neighborhood.
Yes, very much. Hungary has been in the center of focus and attention of many European countries and even global ones this April. At the time when we are recording, still the current Prime Minister is Viktor Orbán, but that will change in 2 days as Magyar Péter will take this role and do some extensive reforms as he claimed internally. However, as you rightfully pointed that out, we are not going to deal with internal affairs at all, just talk about foreign policy and changes and what does this change mean for the Western Balkans in particular.
Well, we will discuss, maybe there are differences like foreign policy, foreign affairs. I'm not sure there is some strict difference. Let's talk basically that what is long-term Hungarian foreign policy in its immediate neighborhood countries, and we can discuss also some particular cases which were publicized.
Okay, so basically discussing Hungarian foreign policy, it's not limited to a certain government. So even government before Orbán, so before 2010, even the new government, probably, that's just an expectation, will take this stance. So basically, what does this mean? These elections, it's not just a beginning of a completely new foreign policy towards the region, because some main objectives remain the same. Hungarian involvement in Western Balkans has been consistent throughout decades, regardless of that who is in power. It's either left or right. Hungary has its own interest because it has its own minority in some countries of the Western Balkans, and this policy hasn't been changing in past 30 years. So this is most likely to continue, as we could hear from the incoming Prime Minister's statements and his program. So basically what's most important for Hungary is peace and stability in the region. That's why you can see, for example, Hungarian troops being very much active in KFOR, Kosovo Force, or within EU missions in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So Hungary sees Western Balkans as a strategically important region where it has its own interests. These interests can vary slightly, so to a slight extent, but they're always focused on one thing, which is peace and security and stability. So yes, that's most important.
You touched on just what I wanted to say and frame a bit. When we talk about foreign relations, you can frame it as an umbrella for security, for economic and other bilateral issues. They go hand in hand. If we compare, for example, Slovakia, we have mostly an economic interest in the Western Balkans. Security is secondary, even though we are present in a couple of missions, but there is a big distinction, and you said it, that there is a big Hungarian minority in Serbia, in Romania, there is some in Slovenia. So security in the region is also security for the Hungarians. So the country needs to be much more involved than other countries for whom it is just a matter of general foreign policy as if it were any other country.
Definitely, minority is a very important fact in this regard. However, it's not the only one. Hungary has learned its historical lessons that southern neighbors can sometimes cause troubles. So in the 1990s, when war erupted in former Yugoslavia, some call it civil war or whatever, this war created huge waves of refugees, for example. It created a sense of instability, of insecurity, as it's currently the case with, for example, Ukraine. However, back then, it was on a much larger scale. And Hungary back then realized that somehow it needs to be involved in the region, in its affairs. How should Hungary do it? Well, it depends on the government how they took this approach. But, for example, the previous government, which was all of the combined Orban governments throughout 16 years, they had similar approach. These regions should be integrated within EU's framework, so Hungary should facilitate its EU progress and should help in any way that it can. Also, regarding strategic objectives of Hungary and concerning the stability and regional safety, basically, and eliminating this threat of new uncertainty in the region, Hungary aims to support Western Balkan countries towards their EU accession.
Yeah, well, there is nothing better than EU accession regarding, yes, economic security, stability, political stability, security, and nowadays there is more and more discussion of a common, unified military cooperation parallel to NATO. So yes, continent is hopefully getting its act together, and it's impossible to do without the Balkans. And yes, Hungary has been very adamant in trying to make the Western Balkans partner progress as quickly as possible, which was the big success of Hungarian presidency at the EU.
Definitely at the Council, because during that presidency actually Albania and Montenegro gained huge advantage over the others because they opened some clusters, closed some chapters, and basically it led them closer towards Brussels. It's not only exclusive to Albania and Montenegro. Hungary has been actively advocated for other countries as well, not only during the presidency, but overall. That's why we like to say Hungary is the best friend of the Western Balkans in Brussels, because it's one of the few actors within the European Union that actively supports enlargement towards this region. However, there is a clash, an issue, because Hungary, during the previous Orban government, hasn't supported Ukrainian accession to the EU. That remains an open question how the new government will handle it. But as far as we can see right now, new government in Hungary, in Budapest, wouldn't focus so much on the region as previous one did. So the new prime minister, incoming prime minister, told many times that it will focus on Visegrad cooperation, it will focus on cooperation with Austria, and it will keep Hungary within European Union framework. So it will mostly align attitude with other member states as well on these questions.
Do you know what were the reactions of the Western Balkans leaders on the victory of Tisza and Péter Magyár?
Yes, I have them here. Okay, so basically regarding the reactions of Western Balkan leaders on the Hungarian elections of April 12th, we can already draw conclusions that the biggest losers in these stories are representatives of Republika Srpska. So only the representatives of Republika Srpska did not congratulate Magyar Péter on his
May
victory.
I interject? Republika Srpska as part of Bosnia and Herzegovina, not to confuse with Serbia, Republika Srpska being a Serbian ethnical part of Bosnia and Herzegovina.
Yes, so basically it's a autonomous, depends who you ask, but they're autonomous part of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and they have completely different attitudes from politicians that are in Sarajevo representing Muslim Bosniaks. So basically Dodik openly stated that he grieves, that he's sad about Orban's defeat, and he will continue cooperating with Orban. So he never mentioned the incoming Prime Minister of Hungary.
Let me be a bit picky. Well, Orban will be ex-minister and Dodik is ex-president, so they will soon have no official capacities, either of them, so they can be the best of friends in a personal capacity.
There is a difference. So Orban is former Prime Minister. However, he will still have some power within his party. He will not have power within Hungary as a state. However, Dodik, on the other side, he is very much still influential political figure, even though he doesn't hold any official political duties. He cannot perform them because it was banned by court of Bosnia and Herzegovina, but he has his own people within government, within state facilities of Republika Srpska, and they're basically practicing his agenda. So he's still very much relevant figure there. However, Sarajevo used this opportunity immediately that now Orban is out of the office and congratulated on that evening. So I think only 1 hour after the election results were published, so the preliminary ones, Foreign Minister of Bosnia and Herzegovina, representative of Muslim Bosniaks, openly stated that he congratulates Péter Magyár and he looks forward to improve the relationship between Sarajevo and Budapest, because previously, during Orban era, these relationships deteriorated and all of the focus was placed in Banja Luka, so the capital of Republika Srpska, the Serbian part.
Yes, I can add to that on a bit. In 2021 there was a bit of a scandal because Orban, he went on air and when discussing Western Balkans he said that one of the big issues regarding European accession, especially Bosnia and Herzegovina, is the 2 million Muslims in Bosnia, and he thinks that they will be a big security issue for the Europe, which of course caused an uproar in political Sarajevo, not as much in Banja Luka. So yes, this basically came around and Sarajevo was now very quick to compliment Péter Magyár on his victory.
Definitely, but just as a side note, Orban government haven't dealt too much with Sarajevo and Muslim Bosniaks. Their main focus was on Banja Luka, and therefore they just tend to ignore Sarajevo for the purposes of maintaining close relationship with Republika Srpska. Why is that? It's very difficult to tell. Some say that it's because of ideological similarities between Dodik and Orban. We cannot know. However, it's a fact that both leaders expressed their supports to each other whenever crisis hit. So Dodik did that for Orban, Orban did that for Dodik, and it's very difficult to imagine that Hungary will continue to support Republika Srpska on any political matters in the future, which will, of course, Sarajevo, they will use it in their own advantage.
It's a very tricky situation because you cannot avoid political Sarajevo because it's the capital and Hungary has actually a very big embassy with 10 diplomats in Sarajevo and working very closely with local, multinational, multilateral and local institutions at the EU delegation, at NATO headquarters, and it's very much present in everyday affairs, but they are probably one of the few ones, not the only one, who are also dealing heavily with Republika Srpska leadership. Other countries try to play the example is Slovakia. At every official meeting, our delegations meet representatives from Bosniaks, from Serbs, and also Croats. So then no one can blame Slovaks that we have any sort of preference. Hungarians, well, they can be blamed for having a preference, which I think is a bit untrue. I think Hungary is also a great investor for all of country because Bosnia is very complicated in that sense, and there is no such thing as a state ownership of Republika Srpska or Federation. There is only one ownership. It has not been yet dealt in the constitution, and Hungary is a great investor. It maintains security. Its number of troops in EUFOR Althea is pretty large, one of the bigger regiments. The connection with Republika Srpska is pretty pronounced. It was in 2005 when Dodik was sentenced by the local court. He was not allowed to continue his function as a president, which he opposed, and he basically came out and said, well, he has strong backers behind him, and right now, for example, there are 300 Hungarian troops. That's it. That's what he said, and it created like a situation when some people suggested that, well, Hungarians are trying to protect him from local authorities or something along that lines. But Dodik has proven later that, well, basically he's a free man. He was traveling to Serbia openly. He was traveling to Israel, so he was in no direct threat from Bosniaks or others.
Yes, just if Hungary was selective towards this relationship, either Sarajevo or Banja Luka, I would say it's not that difficult to tell because, yes, as you rightfully mentioned, the investments, well, they don't choose. So if they want to invest, if there is a fertile ground for investments, then they will invest in Muslim Bosniaks part. That's not an issue. However, I just have some data here, and for example, in 2024, the economic presence in Republika Srpska continued to grow much more exponentially than in other parts. So Hungary and Republika Srpska held a joint business forum in springtime, where investments worth of 140 million euros were announced. So there was a solar power plant in Trebinje, the wastewater treatment plant in Gradiška, and construction of wind farm. So these are the things that, as you see the pattern of investing, it almost always aligns with EU aspirations. So it's either environmental aspect or security aspect or whatever. So it aligns with the EU. This was actually the smart approach of Hungarian government, somehow combine economical prosperity, economical investments, together with security aspect, together with EU integration aspect. So in this regard, Hungary was supportive both for Sarajevo and for Republika Srpska, as of course Hungary accepts Bosnia and Herzegovina as a one state. It accepts Dayton Agreement. However, if I have to say that this relationship was picky and that government in Budapest chose their side, it was a bit clear which side they were on.
So that's pretty much covered in Bosnia and Herzegovina, but Western Balkans is not only that, even though it's my favorite place which I like to discuss. Regarding Kosovo, Slovakia and Hungary, well, everyone has the same goal. It's the stability and peaceful relations in the region, but Slovakia has not recognized the one-sided declaration of independence of Kosovo, and Hungary has. How has Hungary managed that situation? On one hand, recognizing Kosovo, but on the other hand, having fantastic relations with Serbia.
Yes, that's very interesting actually how they managed it, also through a very smart approach. Well, let's put it this way. Their relationship with Kosovo over past decade has cooled down to a point of freezing. So, for example, in 2024, Hungarian leaders, Hungarian officials met with all of the Western Balkan countries' leadership except Kosovo. So there were no bilateral visits, which tells us a lot. In 2025, there was one high-level bilateral visit from Hungarian president to Kosovo. However, I see it as an attempt to basically improve relationship a little bit because of the KFOR presence. And that was the central point of this visit of Hungarian president, the KFOR affairs. So Hungary has stakes in Kosovo regarding this KFOR. Everything apart that, it's very minimal. It's sometimes even counterproductive for relations. Why I say that? Because, for example, in month May 2024, Hungary voted against UN General Assembly resolution of Srebrenica, which directly supported Republika Srpska side, but it also voted against Kosovo's membership in Council of Europe in same year, which obviously shows hostile signals towards Pristina and positive signals towards Belgrade. On the other hand, Hungary recognizes the importance of Serbia because of big minority, Hungarian minority that lives in Vojvodina in north of Serbia, and also recognizes capabilities of Serbia as being the biggest market and the biggest country with the largest population in the region. So Hungary realized this position of this country and took a smart approach of trying to maximize the cooperation with Serbia, as it did after 2013 when this historical reconciliation of two countries happened, and the relationship only got better. But regarding your previous question on how these countries reacted on the outcome of Hungarian elections, also loser to get, if we can say, it's a strong word, but people who don't have anything to gain are also sitting in Belgrade. So for example, Vučić congratulated Péter Magyár on his victory, but obviously he wasn't thrilled, because peak Hungarian-Serbian relationship was reached during Orban and Vučić era in past couple of years. It's not a secret that two leaders had excellent personal relationship. However, in the case of Serbia, stakes are much higher than, for example, in Republika Srpska. Serbia cannot afford to cut its ties with Hungary completely, because it still has some ongoing joint projects that are not finished. For example, Budapest-Belgrade railway, although Serbian side is finished, it's still very much important to connect Belgrade with Budapest and further with other European capitals. This is one thing. The other thing is that there is very important cooperation in energy sector. So gas pipeline that comes through Turkey, then Bulgaria, then Serbia, it reaches final destination in Hungary. So it's very much important for Hungary. I think Hungary gets 2/3 of its gas supplies from this pipeline. It's very much important for them to be in a good relationship because of this. Also, newest developments regarding Hungarian oil company buying Serbian oil company. So MOL buying NIS. There are developments. The negotiations are at the moment very much active, and
there is also oil pipeline being built
from Novi Sad to Aljo. It's also very important strategic objective to build it, because it creates energy diversification that was not there previously. Serbia is heavily dependent on Croatian pipeline JANAF, and Hungary is heavily dependent on Russian oil that flows through Druzhba pipeline, which flows through Ukraine. So our listeners can realize the immense pressure on energy sector that these things have. So these two countries decided to work together on these questions. There is still an open question: how will this continue in the future? Will it continue to flourish as it did? I highly doubt it, but still there is a room for improvement, and I think that new government in Hungary will just continue the good relationship with Serbia without too much focusing on it. So they will just try to somehow keep this relationship alive.
Yes, as you are saying, some things are probably set. They are not dependent on who is at the prime minister's chair. After all, Serbia and Hungary, they share a large border together, and yes, economic interdependency is only growing, and this Hungarian minority in Vojvodina is not going anywhere. How big is it actually?
It's very difficult to state exact numbers, but we can say around 180,000 people live in north of Serbia that is part of Hungarian minority. Why do I say it's very difficult? It's very difficult to follow this statistical data in a country where you have a huge emigration. So a lot of Hungarians that are being registered as Hungarian minority in Serbia do not in fact live there.
Yes, if they have dual citizenship, they are also Hungarian citizens, and yes, there are obvious benefits to having Hungarian passport.
Yes, except for traveling anywhere in Europe, the other benefits be visible in other parts of Hungarian foreign policy towards this region. So, for example, in Serbia specifically, there are foundations that deal with Hungarian minority and invest in them. So, if, for example, somebody has agricultural land, they want to stay in Vojvodina, deal with it, they can request some funds from Hungarian state, and actually Hungarian state assists them to remain there, also assists to create an infrastructure of, for example, Hungarian education there. So this education is performed in Hungarian language, so they keep their culture while still living in territory of Serbia, which was greatly appreciated by Hungarian community in Vojvodina, and that is why the vast majority of Hungarian community voted in favor of Orban staying in power. However, Péter Magyár, as incoming prime minister, stated that that assistance will remain, but it has to be more transparent and it has to prove that these funds are being used effectively and efficiently, basically. That means that the corruption that could have happened in these processes should be eradicated completely. But it is, from his statements at least, it is obvious that these policies will remain in place.
The Hungarian minority politics, it's a world on its own and very unique. It's not only a tool of foreign policy and foreign affairs, but it's also a great responsibility, and it very often creates clashes. Not in Serbia, I mean, that was handled brilliantly. In other parts of Europe, there is a Hungarian minority in Romania.
The biggest one,
and also in Ukraine. Well, that has caused some troubles, and the relationship was more than bad since the war erupted, and even before that.
Even before the war, because of the laws that were introduced, mainly targeting the Russian minority in Ukraine, but somehow the Hungarians happen to have minority there, and therefore the relationship between Ukraine and Hungary deteriorated.
It's not being discussed nowadays because Ukraine has more pressing matters to discuss. But yes, Ukrainian nationalism, which was very present since 21st century has begun. The minorities didn't have everything perfectly laid out for them. And countries which try to empower their minorities also, such as Russia or Hungary.
Yes, and you can also tell us about something about Beneš decree, because it's one of the pressing issues of new Hungarian government, and you probably read that Péter Magyár stated that when he talked with Robert Fico, this is like the first item on the agenda. How do you think it will develop?
The Beneš decrees, they are also always a hot topic, which is discussed along Hungarian Slovak lines, but not only these, because these also involve the Germans in the Czech Republic, and basically they are part of the agreements which concluded the Second World War, and according to them it was legal to take over land and property of ejected Axis allies such as Hungary and of course Germany. And unlike when the Soviets collected the property and they nationalized property, this was returned once the Soviet system collapsed, but not the Beneš decrees. So this is still, we can say, it's not a hot issue, but it's a political issue which keeps coming back. Personally, I think it will be a contentious issue forever, and Slovak side will probably, whichever government is in power, it will not allow it to proceed. There is no point in doing it. It's Slovak law which was adopted, and I cannot imagine what sort of pressure there would have to be, or some sort of deal which would make the government change its mind. I don't see it coming. It's a very old story, from 1945, and
but it definitely grabs attention.
Yes, it does.
Of any Hungarian government, and especially the incoming one, which was exactly my point, is that the Western Balkan region is now being pushed aside because there are much more important things to deal with, especially on internal basis in Hungary. But as we told, we are not going to get into that. But regarding the Western Balkans, so for example, just things like signing the defense cooperation agreement in Belgrade between Hungary and Serbia in April 2025, these things I think won't repeat again, because Hungary and its future prime minister laid out very, very clear foreign policy goals, and to keep Hungary within NATO and within the European Union. These arrangements can happen on bilateral basis, but I would suppose that they wouldn't be so covered in media as, for example, this event was. I don't know if you remember that, but it just happened. It happened in the same time, basically, when Pristina, Tirana, and Zagreb signed some military cooperation agreement, which was represented in Belgrade as some kind of aggression. And there it comes. Hungary, very good friend of Serbia, joined this story somehow by signing the agreement with Serbian military. However, this is merely coincidence, because as one person who can think rationally knows that these things just don't pop up overnight. This was planned for a longer period of time, and it was just very well exposed in media to serve internal political purposes. Same as, for example, if you read about it, or your listeners, about incident in Kanjiža, for example. It's like a small town in Vojvodina. Just week before the Hungarian elections, there was this tip about possible terrorist attacks, and that somebody placed bomb near the gas pipeline that supplies Hungary with gas, and that Serbian authorities figured it out successfully. Some would say it was deliberately invented to help Viktor Orban to win the elections. However, that didn't help. So this is also one of the first things that President of Serbia, new Prime Minister of Hungary don't agree on. And the new Prime Minister of Hungary said that Hungarian authorities will investigate what actually happened here. And then we have a comments from Serbian presidents saying that it's not up to Hungarian Prime Minister to decide what's going to be investigated on Serbian territory, which is hostile rhetoric. And me personally, who witnessed this peak era of Vučić and Orban relationship and Serbian and Hungarian relationship, I couldn't imagine this rhetoric only several months ago. So obviously something will change. However, fundamental things will remain. And by now we discussed a lot about possible losers of a new government in Budapest, but we haven't discussed the winners of it. So, for example, Croatian Prime Minister, he met with Péter Magyár 1 month before the elections on Munich Security Conference, or it was a bit more than 1 month, and they discussed things openly. They took pictures. Andrej Plenković, Croatian Prime Minister, he openly endorsed Péter Magyár to win because he had many constraints regarding Orban, and Croatian and Hungarian relationship was really bad to that point where they accused each other of many things, but especially regarding the energy situation.
Yes, I want to mention that in early 2003, a Hungarian company MOL purchased first 25% of shares in INA and then increased its share to almost 50%, actually owning more than the Croatian government did. And this was very contentious because some argued that at that time a Croatian Ministry of Economy basically sold out and accepted a bribe from MOL. This was later investigated, and it caused a lot of bilateral issues between the two countries, but eventually international courts actually they didn't find a fault with the agreement, and it is as it was agreed upon.
Yes, and actually all of these things happened way before 2010 when Orban stepped into power, but the tensions just continued. So relationship with Croatia wasn't on its best legs, it wasn't standing, and it was visible especially since this energy crisis erupted in Hungary and this part of Europe. You in Slovakia also know it because you're also supplied with Družba pipeline oil, and immediately after Družba pipeline stopped working, Croatians offered their pipeline to get fuel to Hungarian refineries, which is quite suspicious, but still it's caused many sparks in Budapest and many allegations. However, what we could expect is more basically diversification in energy sector with the new government in Hungary, as if they continue having a good relationship with current government in Zagreb, oil can flow in Janaf pipeline towards Budapest, and which could eventually be good for Hungary because in that way it could align itself with EU requirements to stop importing Russian oil, but it's up to the time to see if that could be a right decision or not.
Yes, we can see a nice combination of pragmatic, economic and political cooperation, and on top of that, very often personal relations which can influence that. And yes, the incoming prime minister and foreign minister will have to rebuild relations on their own with the new leaders. And I find Hungarian foreign policy in Western Balkans and its diplomacy very successful and interesting. In the past 30 years, well, Hungary was one of the first which in 1992 openly flouted embargo on arms import to the war zone. They supplied Croatia with a lot of arms, which helped the Croats to win their independence, but also eventually they built great relations with the Serbs as well, despite recognizing Kosovo, and building great relations with Republika Srpska, which is not a sovereign entity, but still being able to do it and winning friends over there. So it's a pretty interesting and I would say a successful story which is ongoing, and it will be a great thing to keep track of.
Definitely, I agree. We just haven't mentioned the states that are basically, they will remain in a status quo. So we have Albania and their leader, Edi Rama, who openly congratulated Péter Magyár, but also expressed gratitude towards Orban on building a good relationship and assisting in the EU accession process. Also, we have Montenegro, which, well, if you follow the news in Montenegro, everything is about the European Union. So basically, they don't care who sits in the place of prime minister in Budapest, but they just care about joint cooperation within EU framework. So they aspire to be EU member.
Yes, and maybe it's gonna happen. They really are ambitious and they want to be part of the EU in 2028 and finish all the clusters and wrap them up this year already.
Yes, I'm quite pessimistic about that, about these dates. But actually, I talked with many people from Montenegro and they are all very much optimistic about that. However, we can see that EU accession is extremely complicated process, even though Montenegro does everything what they can on their part and they fulfill all obligations. There is still this issue within the European Union member states that, they have to accept that we will have another member, we will have a 28th member of the European Union, and try convincing people in France, or parliament in France to be united on this question. It's very difficult. So it remains an open question if Montenegro will join by 2028, but that's a different topic. Very interesting, but it's up to debate. The last one, but not the least, North Macedonia, they also have a pragmatic attitude. They congratulated, and they also expressed gratitude. So very much similar as Albania. The situation with North Macedonia is a bit different than with Albania because Orban's Fidesz party and VMRO-DPMNE are like sisters party. So they're very ideologically close. It remains an open question if this closeness will be continued with Tisza party. I highly doubt it, but still Hungary is economically involved in North Macedonia. Hungary has actually granted a loan to North Macedonia amounting 1 billion euros in 2024, which is substantial amount for one small country like North Macedonia. So they still have connections. In a nutshell, Hungary has connections with all of the Western Balkan countries, for some to a bigger extent, to some to a lesser extent. It will definitely be pragmatic in this relationship, but I just think that attention will shift towards some other members.
Yes, but you forgot to mention, say North Macedonia, it's a big story that during Orban's time, Hungary offered asylum to Gruevski, who was prime minister of North Macedonia, accused for economic crimes in North Macedonia, and was under unknown circumstances suddenly appeared in Hungary and received asylum.
Yes, famous case of Nikola Gruevski. He was former, I think, the longest serving prime minister of North Macedonia, and he was actually, convicted of corruption as a crime, and he was sentenced, I think, 2 years in jail. However, being very close with Orban, very ideologically close, and as I said, two parties are very close as well, he was granted political asylum in Budapest. It all happened in 2018, so from this perspective long time ago. Actually, it's not an open question what will happen. As I remember, on first Péter Magyár's news conference, he was asked by one of the journalists what will happen with these political refugees, like, for example, Gruevski.
And also from Poland.
Yes, two politicians. And Magyar openly expressed that Hungary will not be a place for political asylum. These people will be deported and they should be tried or prosecuted or whatever in jail in their own home countries. So that's the attitude of the new prime minister, incoming prime minister. That creates confusion within North Macedonia because of some legal issues, but also the government in North Macedonia said, even though the Gruevski was the former president of the party, leader of the party, the new leadership of the party and the new prime minister of North Macedonia openly stated that he will be arrested and he will be dealt with according to the law, North Macedonian law.
So I would say that about sums it up in also pretty surprising detail we got into. And yes, the new Hungarian leadership will have other things on its mind beside Western Balkans. But being immediate neighborhood, yes, there will have to be a pretty concrete policy, which is not difficult because after all, until now, it has been also, I would say, pretty successful. And also between Slovakia and Hungary, let there be no open questions.
Definitely, we hope for the best. And just to conclude, so regarding all what we have said in this podcast, the most important objectives remain. So security in the region, stability of the region, cooperation, for example, on migration issues, because Péter Magyár is on the same page as Viktor Orban on these questions, and probably some economic activity in this region. Probably not in a such scale as it happened in previous government, because new Hungarian government tends to look more towards west rather than towards south, but there are high chances that Hungary will remain involved as it used to be in military operations in Kosovo and Bosnia, so it's peacekeeping operations. It will be engaged in economical activities to a certain extent. It will definitely develop some new projects, but we will shift attention from Serbian dominating world towards the other countries of the Western Balkans.
Filip, thank you for coming. Thank you for the debate and explaining us in detail of the Hungarian foreign policy in Western Balkans. And I hope to have you on air in the future regarding our always exciting region.
Thank you, Ako, for inviting me, and thanks for your listeners to keep up with us for all these interviews and podcasts. Thank you.